The moment I stepped into that hotel suite, the air was suffocating. It wasn't just a heavy, perfumed scent lingering in the room or the faint hum of the air conditioning. It was something deeper, something intangible yet overwhelming. The air felt charged, thick with a tension that pressed against my chest. It was the weight of betrayal, of secrets finally uncovered. My eyes scanned the room, and there she was, Isabella, my wife. Her arms were draped around the neck of another man, their bodies close, their laughter sharp and unapologetic. It cut through the silence, a jagged blade slicing through the fragile remnants of my belief in her. But I didn't feel anger, not immediately. There was no outburst, no immediate confrontation. What I felt instead was a calm, so cold it was almost terrifying. It was a clarity that sharpened every detail of the scene before me, turning disbelief into something hard and unrelenting. They didn't notice me standing there in the doorway, frozen but aware. Their obliviousness was their first mistake. They thought they were clever, that their secrets were safely hidden. But I had known for weeks. This wasn't a moment of discovery for me. It was confirmation. While they laughed, whispered, and reveled in their false sense of security, I had been planning. The game they thought they were playing was already over, and they didn't even know it. Our perfect life, the one everyone envied, had been a facade for years. From the outside, our marriage was a masterpiece. Isabella was a renowned architect, celebrated for her designs that graced the pages of prestigious magazines. She was admired at every gala, every event, always the center of attention. People adored her, and by extension, they admired us. We were the golden couple. She, the creative visionary. Me, Gabriel Moretti, the financial strategist whose influence stretched across continents. Together, we seemed invincible, a picture-perfect partnership living a dream life. But every dream has its shadows, and ours had been growing darker for some time. The signs were faint at first, almost imperceptible. A missed dinner here, a vague excuse there. Isabella's late nights became more frequent, her explanations rehearsed and polished. She'd come home with a tired smile, sighing about client meetings and deadlines as she slipped off her heels. There was an exhaustion in her voice, a weariness that I didn't question. And yet, there were small things I couldn't ignore. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to her clothes, the way her phone seemed to vibrate more often, her sudden absences that were always neatly excused. I wanted to believe her. I told myself that her world was demanding, filled with admirers and colleagues who vied for her attention. Surely, I thought, there was nothing more to it. But those small signs began to form patterns, and those patterns grew into habits. Her late nights turned into entire weekends away. Our once intimate conversations grew sparse, replaced by silence that stretched between us like an uncrossable chasm. The turning point came at a charity auction. Isabella stood beside me, stunning in an emerald gown that turned heads all night. She smiled and laughed, but there was a distance in her eyes, a hollowness that unnerved me. Her phone buzzed discreetly on the table, and I caught the flicker of unease in her expression. She glanced at the screen, her reaction barely noticeable, but I saw it. A name flashed for the briefest moment, Raphael. It meant nothing to anyone else in that room, but to me, it was the first crack in the foundation of everything we had built. I didn't confront her, not that night. I watched her as she slept beside me, her breathing soft and steady. But I couldn't rest. That name, Raphael, gnawed at me, a quiet torment that refused to be ignored. Long after she drifted into sleep, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the living room. Her phone lay charging on the table, its screen dim in the darkness. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The messages were locked behind a passcode, of course, but her email wasn't. I scrolled through countless work-related correspondences until I found it. A message marked confidential from Raphael. The words seared themselves into my mind. Asterisk, last night was unforgettable. I can still feel your warmth. Same time next week. Asterisk, a wave of anger swept through me, but I didn't act on it. Not yet. Instead, I returned to bed, lying next to her as she slept soundly, completely unaware. My resolve hardened in those hours of darkness. She had no idea that I knew, and that ignorance would be her undoing. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye, her smile as sweet and casual as ever, as though nothing had changed. But everything had. As the door closed behind her, I made my decision. I would uncover every detail, piece by piece. Over the following days, I became consumed by a need for answers. Her credit card statements revealed dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, lavish meals for two. Her calendar was filled with meetings that neatly coincided with her absences. And then there was a Valencia hotel, a luxury retreat where she had checked in twice under her name, with Rafael Morales listed as her guest. The pieces of her betrayal fell into place with every discovery, each one sharpening my focus. I wasn't just a husband betrayed. I was a man on a mission. The anger I felt simmered beneath the surface, controlled and deliberate, as I began to plan. Confronting her directly would have been too simple, too easy. No, I wanted something more. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to understand that betrayal comes at a cost. She continued her charade, blissfully unaware that I was watching her every move. She thought she had fooled me, thought she could live this double life without consequence. But she was wrong. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger or heartbreak. It was about justice. For years, trust had been the cornerstone of what we shared. It was the foundation of every promise made, every dream imagined, and every unspoken understanding. But trust, as I came to learn, is a fragile thing, so easily shattered by carelessness, by selfishness, and by lies. Isabel had destroyed it all, so recklessly, so thoughtlessly, as if it meant nothing. She and Raphael had no idea what they had truly unleashed. They saw me as a man they could fool, a man they could dismiss. They didn't realize that the very cracks their betrayal created would become the fault lines of their downfall. Betrayal doesn't burst into your life with loud proclamations. It doesn't wear a warning sign or announce itself with grand gestures. No, betrayal is subtle, insidious. It creeps into the tiniest cracks, so silent and so invisible that you don't realize the damage until it's too late. By the time you see it for what it is, the foundations of your life have already started to crumble. And those who commit the betrayal, they rarely see the storm they've unleashed until it's upon them. But this time, the storm wouldn't just arrive unannounced. It would carry my name. It wasn't the grand gestures of deceit that hurt the most. No, it was the small, deliberate details, the sheer audacity of her lies, the way she wove them so carefully into the fabric of our shared life, assuming I wouldn't notice the loose threads. But I noticed everything I always had, every glance, every hesitation, every subtle shift in her tone. She underestimated me, and that was her greatest mistake. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Late nights at work, business trips that seemed to multiply without warning, her constant reassurances that everything she did was for us, for our future. It could all be rationalized, couldn't it? But then there was the way her voice wavered ever so slightly when she explained her absences, the way her gaze would flicker away from mine when I asked about her day. My instincts screamed that something was wrong, and for once, I chose to listen. I began watching, observing, waiting. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I followed her movements, careful not to alert her to my suspicions. Every evening she claimed to be working late. I was there, trailing at a safe distance, blending into the background. It didn't take long to notice the pattern. She always ended up at the same place, the Valencia, an upscale hotel with a reputation for discretion. She was cautious, always glancing over her shoulder, but she wasn't cautious enough. The first time I saw him, Raphael, was outside the hotel. He greeted her with the kind of familiarity that spoke volumes. His arm slid around her waist, his touch lingering. She leaned into him, her face lighting up with a smile so warm, so unguarded, that it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. It was the kind of smile she hadn't given me in years. And in that moment I knew there was no misunderstanding it. This wasn't a professional relationship. This was betrayal. Strangely, I didn't feel anger, not at first. Anger would have been too easy, too impulsive. Instead, I felt cold, calculating. If I was going to dismantle this betrayal, it wouldn't be with a rash confrontation. No! It would require precision, patience, and strategy. Over the next week, I began gathering evidence. Hotel bookings, emails, credit card receipts. Every piece of proof I could find became part of my arsenal. The opportunity to act came sooner than I expected. A week later, I invited Isabella to dinner at home. I prepared her favorite dish, paella, with saffron and fresh seafood, paired with a vintage bottle of Rioja I knew she loved. She arrived late, as I anticipated. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. A look that once would have melted my heart. Now, it only confirmed my suspicions. "Long day?" I asked, my tone neutral, as I poured her a glass of wine. She nodded, her practiced smile firmly in place. "Exhausting, but worth it. We landed the contract." "Did you?" I replied, setting down my glass and meeting her gaze. "Or did Raphael land something else tonight?" Her smile faltered. For a split second, panic flickered across her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice wavering. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, letting her discomfort grow. Then, without a word, I pulled out the stack of evidence I had meticulously collected. I placed it on the table between us, watching her face as she registered what it was. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers. "Gabriel, it's not." "Don't insult me by saying it's not what it looks like," I snapped, my calm facade cracking. "Because it looks exactly like what it is. You've been sneaking around with Raphael, lying to my face, and destroying everything we built." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sadness, no pity. Only a cold satisfaction as I watched her lies unravel. "Gabriel, I made a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't mean—" "Stop," I said sharply. "This isn't the time for apologies. This is the time for consequences." The next day, I put my plan into motion. I booked the same suite at the Valencia where they always met, turning the sight of their betrayal into the stage for their downfall. Using a burner phone, I contacted Raphael under a fake name, posing as a potential investor and arranging a meeting at the hotel. When the day came, I arrived early and set the stage, bringing with me every piece of evidence I had collected, including a recording of Isabella's tearful confession. When Raphael arrived, his usual arrogance was on full display. He poured himself a drink as if he owned the place, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Moments later, Isabella entered, her face pale and anxious. When she saw me standing in the corner, her expression froze in terror. "Gabriel," she stammered. "What are you?" "Please sit," I interrupted, my voice calm but commanding. Raphael glanced between us, visibly uneasy. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, placing the stack of evidence on the coffee table, "is the end of your little game." The rest unfolded like clockwork, every word, every revelation meticulously planned. They thought they could play me, but they underestimated just how far I was willing to go. And when the dust settled, when their lives lay in ruins, I stood above it all, untouched and unbroken. The storm had a name, and they would never forget it.